I am Carker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the individual chapter connects to the rest of the manga as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are currently discussing. This is Chapter 124, but it's also the beginning of Volume 15. So let's get into it. This is Bleach, Volume 15, a Shonen Jump manga with story and art by Kubo Tite. I judge any new anime by its opening sequence. The one for Bleach was better than I expected. I was so happy I burned a DVD of it so I can watch it over and over. Actually, I watch it every night before I go to bed. For those of you out there who love Bleach and think you're its biggest fan, sorry, but that's probably me. Kubo Tite. Bleach is author Kubo Tite's second title. Kubo made his debut with Zombie Powder, a 4-volume series for Weekly Shonen Jump. To date, Bleach has been translated into numerous languages and has also inspired an animated TV series that began airing in Japan in 2004. Beginning its serialization in 2001, Bleach is still a mainstay in the pages of Weekly Shonen Jump. In 2005, Bleach was awarded the prestigious Shogakukan Manga Award in the Shonen Boys category. By the by, this one is rated T for teen, recommended for ages 13 and up. This volume contains fantasy violence. I just keep practicing saying goodbye to you. Bleach, Volume 15, Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. These are the Bleach All-Stars and stories.
Well, hold on.
We've got Ichigo Kurosaki here, Zangetsu, Uryu Ishida, Yoriichi, Mayuri Kurotsuchi, and Nimu Kurotsuchi. The plot so far. Ichigo infiltrates the stronghold of the Soul Reapers and fights his way to the Senzai-Kyu, where Rukia is being held prisoner. Lying in wait for him is the merciless Byakuya Kuchiki. But Yoriichi pulls Ichigo out of the battle to give him 3 days of special training to make him stronger. Meanwhile, Uryu faces the Soul Reaper who killed his grandfather. Will Uryu have his long-awaited revenge, or be added to the body count himself? Bleach, Volume 15, Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. Chapter 124, Crying Little People. How can he be standing when his arms and legs have been slashed by Ashisogi Jizo, the leg-cutting guardian? I know. He's using Ranso Tengai, disheveled paradise puppets. Bundles of reishi are spirit particles twisted into countless threads, are attached to his frozen limbs, moving him like a puppet. Ranso Tengai was created so that decrepit Quincy's could keep fighting hollows. Severed tendons and shattered bones make no difference with this move. Using it, one can fight until one literally turns to dust. It's the ultimate combat spirit move of reishi controlling Quincy's. I thought it was a lost art, found only in history books. In fact, of the 2,661 Quincy's I've studied, not one could perform even a part of the Ranso Tengai. But you've mastered it at so young an age. Are you what they call a genius? Bleach, Chapter 124, Crying Little People. Uryu, I know you've been spending time with my father again. How many times have I told you not to go there? But, I don't want to hear excuses. I've told you about that, too. There's no sense in saving the dead. That's Soul Reaper's job. Your time would be better spent learning to save the living. I'm not interested in the Quincy's. You don't have the talent for it anyway. Let the Quincy's die out with my father's generation. Understood. But, Dad, why do you hate the Quincy's so much? Because there's no profit in them. Well, he does have a point. It's not easy making a living these days as a Quincy. And your father has a family to support. Well, there's nothing wrong with what he said, of course. You aren't wrong either, are you? But I could see them, the Hollows and the people they attack. The Soul Reapers can't handle it by themselves. I've seen it with my own eyes. Why? Dad must be able to see those things too. So how? How can he ignore them? Master, I want to be strong. I want to be a powerful Quincy and protect everyone from the Hollows. Then maybe Dad will think the Quincy's are worth something. Thank you, Uryu. Excellent. I believe you won't bore me after all. I'm not going to kill you. I'm taking you back alive. You and the girl will be my experiments. But, Uryu, try to understand your father. What you think is right depends on what you want to protect. That's how people are. What does Dad want to protect? His money? You'll find out in time. And when you do, you'll know what you want to protect too. Uryu, for when that time comes, I'm entrusting you with this. You'll eventually learn what your father cares about most. When you find out what you truly want to protect, and if you still wish to walk the path of a Quincy, you will face a battle you cannot avoid. A battle beyond your abilities. A time will come when you have to sacrifice yourself. When it comes, use this. I'm sorry, Master. I still don't understand my father. I'm not even sure what I want to protect, but I think I at least know what I won't allow. This is Sanare Shuto, our Scattered Spirits glove. Put it on and train for 7 days and 7 nights. You will reach the peak of your Quincy powers. But don't forget, Uryu, once you put it on, you can never take it off. If you do, your powers as a Quincy will all be lost. I'm sorry, Master. I'm disobeying you one last time. What? What? What's that? Meanwhile, in the world of the living, Series 3, gorgeous and sexy and rock and roll and me, Mr. Cohen's Me Diary. August 8th, cloudy. I took Ichigo's place when he went to the Soul Society. I thought his family would be overjoyed to see him. Sister A had a guilty look on her face. Sister B seemed totally uninterested. Father A was obviously annoyed. What the heck is this? Are they upset about splitting the watermelon 4 ways? That is it for Bleach Chapter 124 in the beginning of Volume 15. This chapter was yet another title that I do not remember, as I also don't remember the beginning of the volume's name. I think the beginning of the end of the death. Crying Little People was this chapter, by the way. But we're going to go back to the beginning of this volume. I also try not to linger on the titles, the chapter title. Okay. Back to the beginning of the volume. There we go. Alright, so yeah, volume 15, which is the beginning of the death of tomorrow. We have, of course, pictured here on this volume a pretty dynamic image of Kira Izuru, or Izuru Kira, however you want to put his name first and last there. But the lieutenant of the 3rd Division, as he is kind of enshrouded in these draping bits of darkness here, and his Shihakusho sort of ends up being caught all up in the same darkness. I think it's a pretty striking image. It really gives the sense of Kira kind of being caught in this dark web. And yeah, you wonder how complicit he is in it, how much he's just caught up in it, how troubled he is by it. He certainly seems like he has a troubled expression, but that's kind of just Kira in general. Interesting that Kira is getting himself a volume cover. You know, outside of Renji, I'm really trying to think of if we've gotten a volume cover from another lieutenant so far. Did Ikaku get one? No, well, he's not a lieutenant anyway. Yeah, I don't think so. So yeah, it's interesting. Certainly. Perhaps we'll get more from Kira in this volume. But all in all, I do like this volume cover quite a lot. I think it's one of the better ones so far. Certainly, I like the composition a lot on it. I like the way that the blacks run with his Shihakusho as well. Of course, Kubo loves the first opening for Bleach, the Asterisk opening. Sorry if you think you're Bleach's biggest fan, it's probably Kubo. I do love the little icon here that he uses, the I Love Bleach mug there. It's good stuff. Of course, typical sort of intro. Our character poem shows Kira with arms, or like arms, what did I say? Hands around his throat. Pretty sure that it's Kira, given it's Kira on the cover, and the fringe of hair, the sort of long, light-colored hair going back, is very similar to Kira's own. So I believe that this is meant to be Kira here, being strangled. If not, let's see, if it was him strangling himself, it would be a little bit awkward, right? It's kind of hard to get your hands at your own throat without crossing your arms over one another if you were trying to put them in that same position. So it seems like it's somebody else, perhaps, strangling Kira. Someone else's long, slender hands there. But yes, this poem, I just keep practicing saying goodbye to you. The idea being that it's somebody that knows that they have something, a goodbye to say, somebody that has a kind of farewell, even if it's, them dying, if it's them having to depart, somebody that has a connection. And it's evoking our typical kind of ideas of loss, of one's connection to others, of the strain of those connections. So it's certainly an evocative poem. Pretty short one, too. We don't have that much insight into Kira, so if we're trying this poem to him, it's a little difficult at this point in the narrative. But, maybe there is somebody that he feels like he is going to have to kind of separate from. We can't really tell how close he is to Momo, but the only other connections that we really see that he has is, of course, to his captain. So maybe there's something happening with Gen. Who knows? Here we're shown, of course, our stars, the prominent featuring characters. Given that Ichigo is to learn Bankai in the next 3 days, it only makes sense that Ichigo and Zangetsu might be featured. Of course, we have Uryu as well as Mayuri and Nemu, who are currently engaged in this battle, and Yurichu, who is training Ichigo. So we get a sense that maybe this volume will contain those characters. I don't like lingering on the chapter titles that long for the volume. I like those to be kind of as we get to the chapters, we learn them. You could certainly pause the video and take time to read them on your own, but it's not something that I really care to spend time reading over whenever I start these volumes. Mostly because I'm trying to kind of keep this spoiler light, and that could be considered a spoiler with the way that some of these chapters are titled. Not necessarily in this volume, but certainly in some volumes. So I've kind of tried to keep the chapter titles a mystery, or intentionally hidden in previous videos, and I'll continue to do that moving forward. Here, this chapter title, by the way, "Crying Little People," certainly feels like it is a reference to Uryu as a child, right? And if not Uryu, then the people that are certainly suffering that Uryu sees, right? Anyway, we find that the reason that Uryu can stand up and move here at the beginning, which again, really good visuals. I really like Uryu front and center here. All this reishi kind of with these long strand-like connections to him. We get Nemo on the floor looking kind of over her shoulder, spattering of blood to remind us of her abused and downtrodden position. We get a very defiant looking Mayuri. And of course, Uryu tearing away at his sleeve, and this reveal that he's using this technique called Ranso Tengai, right? The disheveled paradise puppets. But yes, Ranso Tengai, it is this technique that a Quincy can control their limbs using strands of reishi. So it's a pretty high level technique and pretty cool. I like the idea of you can't make your body move on your own with your brain for whatever reason, and so you're going to control your limbs. And it makes sense because, if we've got these ostensibly just human characters fighting enemies like hollows, humans typically lack the vitality that a Soul Reaper or a hollow does. We've seen the ways in which Ichigo's been wounded and that he's been able to survive thanks to being a kind of powerful spiritual body. But if a human is just ostensibly controlling their physical human body, they're likely to end up with what was said here, right? Broken bones, severed tendon, shattered bones. So the idea is that this is a technique that would allow Quincy's that have been injured in those ways to continue to fight. Let's also mention that it was created so decrepit Quincy's could keep fighting hollows. I don't know if that's a particularly bad translation or not, because it mostly focuses on the idea of fighting through injury otherwise. So, in English, decrepit usually kind of takes on the meaning of, somebody who is very old and withered. And certainly, perhaps Uryu's grandfather might fit the description. But, notably, in the same page, we get the note that of the 2,661 Quincy's that Mayuri has pretty much taken apart, not one of them could even do a part of Ranso Tengai, so assumably that is the case too for Uryu's grandfather, and so this technique is a very rare one indeed. But of course we get to see it here with Uryu, and he bandages up his cuts using that strip of fabric from the Shihaku show, so that he's not openly bleeding. And we get this kind of nice shot here where it's this huge sort of wave of reishi above him that is, got all these different strands that are leading to his body. It's certainly an interesting visual. It's very, very you could certainly interpret it as like horns or something. I see it kind of almost as like womb-like, but you know, I don't know if there's any other greater connections to tie there. Of course, Mayuri's got this. I don't even know how I would describe this expression. Almost frustrated but interested. It's almost a sarcastic expression. It's hard to come across. I don't know the lidding of the eyes, especially, and the way that he's looking. Perhaps I would say bemusement, maybe. I do like again the shading here, using the sort of graphic stippled effect that he's used before for the shading on the interior of Mayuri's kind of crown that he has. Very cool stuff. Otherwise, yeah, yeah, it's quite a bit of, like moments where I think the shading is nice, but other moments where like we've got the lines for the edge of a shadow, and then the sketch of the shading breaks that, or parts that I feel like should have maybe been shaded separately, like each of these conical sort of discs that go into the sides of his head that are just done as a single long line, where it feels perhaps a little less you know, what am I going to say? A little less clean. Um, Certainly, parts where their shading lines extend all the way past the edge of this disc, where this seems like it's supposed to be flat, or at least like slightly circular. It's yeah, not exactly the cleanest, but again, I'm fine with it. A little bit cleaner shading here on Uryu. But I do like the way like where Kubo's kind of landed with his line work and his shading. Certainly, like very very like I want to say really confident line work compared to what we used to get. A lot of line variety too. If you just look at the thickness of the lines and the detail that's in Uryu's glasses, even the variety of that, down to the difference between the thickness of his cheek and his collarbone, um, and even the Shihakusho that he's wearing. It's good stuff. It's solid sort of line work, and I do appreciate it. It does make these characters sort of pop in a way that they normally probably wouldn't. So it's neat. We get this kind of iconic Ichigo running with Zangetsu, sort of becoming unwrapped on his back. This image of Ichigo, or this sort of posing of Ichigo, is one that I think Kubo likes quite a bit, and you'll see quite often um, for Bleach. So interesting that this is such an Uryu chapter, but we get Ichigo on the cover, our title kind of cover page. Bizarre that, right? We go into flashback. As we know, we've got the kind of black bordered panels, the black pages. That's what immediately lets us know we're in flashback. We get to see a young Uryu, little dorky Uryu, and we actually get to see Uryu's father for the first time. I believe that we're supposed to take that Uryu's father is a doctor, just by the way that he's dressed, um, given the kind of long white coat, but I don't think it's expressed explicitly here. Nevertheless, we get this back and forth. We know Uryu considers himself the last Quincy, but that might not be, entirely because he's the last Quincy alive. Rather, his father seems to have denounced being a Quincy in general, right? That he's just going to leave this up to the Soul Reapers, and perhaps it's because he sees the futility of that struggle, right? And so, you know, it's kind of interesting here that young Uryu asks why he hates the Quincy's so much, and he doesn't seem to have a statement about hatred. It doesn't really seem like he has this deep, boiling hatred in this moment. But he looks over and he says there's no profit in being a Quincy, right? You can't make any money. How are you going to provide for your family, right? Of course, we do know from the kind of like those extra pages that Ishida lives a pretty poor life. He can't even afford to have a cell phone. If we remember some of those omake, or either he can't afford to or he doesn't have one. He just chooses not to have one. So, you know, maybe there's some truth to that. Though he is also a high school student, so I can't imagine living on his own. I don't even know how he's managing to support that. Uh, all I'm saying is that Uryu's a bum, and if he was a Soul Reaper and he was killing hollows, he would be getting paid straight to his phone, just like Rukia does, right? So we get this back and forth between Soken and Uryu. We get, oh well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with him. There's nothing wrong with you. And we get the sense that Uryu really wants to protect people from hollows, right? And then he feels like Soul Reapers aren't able to do it, which, as we've learned, maybe they are just capable, but Mayuri intentionally holds them up. So, oof, rough stuff. So, really, if you take it back to the beginning, Mayuri is the one responsible for Uryu becoming a Quincy. His own undoing. Woohoo? Perhaps. Anyway, of course, Uryu wants to protect everyone from hollows, which he doesn't seem to have been doing a very good job of in Karakura Town, all things considered. Uh, yeah, yeah. Maybe he backed off a little bit whenever he sensed that Rukia was in town because he doesn't want to give himself away. That's the way that I kind of read it, Like, as much of a grandstanding that Uryu makes about Quincy being superior. His superior Quincy Ash sure didn't get involved with Grand Fisher or any of the other hollows, maybe because narratively he wasn't a part of the plot. But, we also do actually see him in brief glimpses at the Demi Hollow whenever Ichigo and Don Kanoji fight that one man who became a hollow, and we see that Uryu intentionally does not get involved. And again, I think the point is that Uryu, at that point in the story, knew that Rukia and therefore Ichigo were Soul Reapers, and he didn't want to give himself away, mostly because maybe he was kind of observing, but also I think he didn't want to get caught. Ooh, words. He didn't want to get caught being the last of the Quincy, right? Knowing what Soul Reapers are doing to Quincy. Perhaps not truly aware of the massacre that's happening, but yeah. Of course, here we get Uryu with the Sanrei glove, the bow, and Mary does something very questionable, and then he tears out this earpiece, and we get to see his nasty ear guts. And I don't know for what purpose. I'll have to keep an eye on this. But yeah, I mean, it's a striking visual for sure. The idea that, yeah, he's going to take Uryu back alive, experiment on him. We cut back to flashback. Uh, Uryu is becoming more skeptical of his father, but Soken seems to kind of understand. And he expresses, you'll find out. And you'll know what you'll want to protect too. Which is nice and all, but really kind of doesn't tell us much of anything. We get a little bit of a dump about how Uryu's been left this glove, and it really I feel like a lot of this is pretty exposition heavy. I wish that there was perhaps less text here, especially earlier. There's moments like whenever the Ranso Tengai is explained, and we're given all of these in the description these kind of evocative lines about decrepit Quincy fighting hollows and shattered bones making no difference and fighting until one turns to dust. But the visual that we're given is like a nothing visual, and we keep getting that a lot with a lot of these kind of really expository moments. It's not so bad in that flashback, but yeah, here, whenever he's like, okay, well, I'm leaving this glove, and it'll do this, this, and this, and we just get shots in the box. Yeah, I just kind of wish there was more going on. It seems like Miri's got something in his other hand though it's a little hard to tell. And maybe we'll have to get the next chapter to figure out what's going on with whatever he pulled out of his ear there. We do get a fantastic shot of both Mayuri and Uryu. And, this kind of final moment where it's expressed that should Uryu take off the glove, all of his Quincy powers will be lost, and he decides that he is going to, of course, take off the glove in order to, gain this huge burst of power, right? We get this double page of Uryu with a really cool look. He's got this massive jet of reishi coming out of side of him. I always read that as him absorbing all of this reishi into this big wing of his. But we get this kind of fantastical design. It is pretty cool. And then that is really it for the chapter. I mean, we just get this little gag bit about them not wanting to split the watermelon 4 ways for Cone. I'll talk a little bit more on this design whenever we can see a little bit better, but we do get a redesign of the bow. We get these kind of cool kind of line work going across the sleeve there. We get the sort of asymmetrical garb that's over the Shinigami outfit that he's already wearing, where now he's got this huge sort of almost banner draped over his waist on one side, and he's got half of a jacket. It's a cool look. We'll get a better look at it next chapter, I hope, but we'll talk more about it in detail then. But all in all, I think it's supposed to be solidifying him as this kind of powerful Quincy, and I'm glad that him breaking the glove kind of comes with this upgrade. Otherwise, that's about all that I have to say for the chapter. I do want to mention, this is the first that we're seeing Uryu's father. I do like the kind of strict and stern look that he has. I appreciate them both having the middle part in their hair. It's nice little details like that. But yeah, definitely a very different kind of father figure than what we saw with Ishin, and I think that's important. That we're seeing two dads that take their work very differently. That we see two dads that take their child rearing very differently. And yeah, it's an interesting kind of take for sure, and I think it highlights the difference between Uryu and Ichigo in a pretty strong way. Uryu's just ready to kill Mayuri here too. Of course, that's the whole idea, right? Is that he is ready to give up his Quincy powers, to lose them all, to stake it on this battle, because of course he found this ultimate sort of villain. Yeah, that's basically it for the chapter. I don't have much else to say on it. Solid chapter, all said. It's a little light on the action. I mean, all in all, we get 2 flashbacks, technically 3, and Uryu breaks his glove and gets a transformation. Mayuri, I guess, rips something nasty out of his ear. It's pretty light on actual action and interaction as well. I wish there was perhaps a little bit more in the way of interaction. I wish we would have seen Ranso Tengai kind of being used in ways that were evocative, rather than just being told to us what it does. I mean, we're shown that he can get up despite the paralytics, which is fine, but maybe him fighting a little bit in that before he decides to use the glove would have been nice. But if he's to this point where this is the only way that he can make use of this power, it's okay. But all in all, I guess I find myself wanting more of it, which isn't a bad thing. Yeah, it's certainly neat. It highlights, I think that there's something kind of going on here that I do appreciate, that gets brought up, is this idea of Ishida being this sort of once in a generation, super talent genius, and he has, this technique, but he's willing to kind of sacrifice all of that for the power to defeat his opponent. Because despite all of that, he still doesn't have enough power, and so like there's this sense of like fragility in power, and the idea of giving up, like this great power to accomplish a certain means. And this is something that we'll see in Bleach a good bit. The idea of power being kind of self-destructive, or power being something that can be very fragile and easily lost, and that like, perhaps it's better not to exercise your true strength lest it, break apart. I don't know. Like there's like a brittleness to this power, even though it's like resplendent in a way. It's kind of an interesting idea. It certainly speaks towards like overstepping your reach or overstepping your bounds, or using your power to do something that's going to then cause you to lose that sort of the standing that you have, or whatever it is that allows you to kind of make that decision, which is something that kind of comes up in life here and there. Nevertheless, it's interesting. I do wish that we had a little bit more back and forth there between Mayuri and Uryu. And I do wish that the flashbacks, I like the flashback with Uryu's father, but his grandfather flashbacks, I wish there was perhaps a little bit more going on, or perhaps less just like exposition spoken at Uryu about exactly how the Sanri glove works, because we can just be shown that stuff, really. We don't have to have it told to us so explicitly. Anyway, yeah, bit of a mixed bag on this chapter. I do like it, of course. There are elements that I will always like of a Bleach chapter, but, lots of things that I feel like could have been done in a way that would have highlighted the strengths of this chapter a bit more. Let me know what your thoughts are. Please do tell me. So, without much else to say about the chapter and the art and kind of what's going on narratively, I do want to get to talking about spoilers, how this chapter connects to the rest of the series as a whole. And so let's get right in. Of course, Kira kind of being in this world of darkness, of Shinigami, is immediately evocative. We know that he's tied up in Gen's plans, and ultimately is going to have to kind of split off from Gen too, as he ends up siding with the Soul Society, or being kind of left. He can't come with Gen. I feel like the character poem fits just as much for Gen as it does for Kira. I think the idea of Kira, saying goodbye, either to Gen or to Soul Society, either way, that he is getting ready for this kind of moment. Yeah, it's interesting. The hands around his throat. I kind of, I don't know really how to like interpret if that's meant to be Gen's hands, if that's meant to be his own hands, like what it is, right? You can certainly see it as Gen's, as like a sort of betrayal. But I don't know. At the end of the day, is he really betraying Kira? Didn't really talk about the volume title. Don't really have so much to say about the beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. It does tie in to Yuha Bach a little bit. That's maybe why I didn't speak much about it. The idea of like, the future sort of being controlled by Yuha Bach. Because I believe that is the chapter where, yeah, that's chapter 127, and we'll get to that whenever we get to 127. At least I'm pretty sure that ties in there. Anyway, and there is a little bit of like Yuha Bach tie-in to these chapters. At least that's the way that I'm reading them now. So, yeah, of course, Ranso Tengai. The only other time that I think that we really explicitly see it is with Courage, Kyoge Obi, however you want to pronounce that guy's name, the Gel, the Stern Ritter. He makes use of this technique. and I kind of always have read it as like whenever the start we're able to move around, despite me thinking they're pretty much done so, as perhaps some Ranso Tengai. It's interesting that he says like, out of all these Quincy that he studied, not even one could perform a part of it. But he's mastered it, which makes me think like, okay, well, how did he learn it? Did he like learn it from books? Did he learn it from? He was just taught it, even though his master couldn't use it. I don't know. Yeah. I'm trying to think of, there's any other things that I really wanted to speak there towards this moment of genius or Mayuri or whatever. Of course, Ryukin being cool. Like I think Ryukin not wanting to start up and make a fuss, kind of leaving things to the Shinigami, knowing kind of what's happening with the Quincy. He's in a way sort of protecting Uryu from being involved in all of that, from becoming one of Mayuri's experiments. So it does make sense. Why he says there's no profit in them, why he couches in this idea of profitability and of money is perhaps strange. I mean, there's certainly not a Quincy profit, unless you consider that to be Uryu, the other Shrift A, or even perhaps Yuhabak himself. But I think moreover, Ryukin was planning to use the Still Silver Arrow himself, right? And like, there is this kind of moment where like we have Soken expressing like, okay, well, you know, yeah, it's not easy to make a living as a Quincy these days. And you're like, there's this idea of like, well, maybe the Quincy's are worth something, and it's like, I think in a way, a lot of this early Ryukin writing is really meant to align him against, uh, like really at the very beginning, this idea that he's like really doesn't want his son to become a Quincy, to get involved in all this nonsense, and then later it's kind of like, well, don't associate with the Shinigami, which certainly makes sense if you're reading it from the perspective of like, don't get involved with those self-serving Shinigami. You remember Mayuri is the one that literally tore my father apart, your grandfather. Yeah. So like, there's this idea, like he has this moment here where he asks like what dad wants to protect, his money, and there's this kind of long look, and like, you'll find out in time. And I think the implication, right, is that his father wants to protect Uryu, and Uryu is too juvenile to see that, right? Um, but moreover, in the larger scheme of things, with the Still Silver Arrow and all of that, it's like, yeah, he's trying to protect Uryu, but he's also trying to kind of take upon himself, because he's still practicing the Quincy arts, as we find out in the Arankar arc, right? He's still trying to hide, perhaps, his status as a Quincy, because I think he wants to kind of get involved, and stop Yuhabak because of the death of Katagiri, right? And if he can keep Uryu from getting kind of tied up in all of that, perhaps he can keep Uryu alive, because he's seen how being a Quincy took his own wife, right? Um, so yeah, it's kind of interesting. There's this different sort of idea of past the power and all of that. I was talking about the kind of fragility of power, and this is something that comes up again. Certainly something that I think people criticize Kubo for, right? The idea that you can, lose all of your powers to gain a great power boost, defeat an enemy, but then you can just get those powers back. And it's like, I think in both the case of Uryu and Ichigo getting their powers back, it serves a kind of different purpose in their rebirth. And Uryu's, it certainly, like, is about him kind of trying to embrace his father's philosophy a little bit, and really inheriting his father's mission, even. And in Ichigo, it is you know, his change, the change that he's had, the effect that he's had on Soul Reapers, and the fact that Ichigo has now chosen to become a part of this battle again, whenever he could have stayed out of it. And so he's decided to kind of enter that world of his own volition, and because of that, he's able to kind of have that entry back in because he's affected the Soul Society in the ways that he has. So I'm fine, honestly, with both of them. I think it's an intentional mirroring. Again, I don't think it's like there's certainly people that feel like it's like hack writing, and I don't really see it as such. I think the parallel is meant to be like intentional, and I think like especially like there's just too many like parallel moments, like the striking near the heart, and the kind of like having a father figure kind of be there for it, and it being kind of taking on like this like a willful kind of taking on of the sort of mission that you need to have going forward, where Ichigo wants to become a Soul Reaper moving forward, just as Uryu wants to regain its Quincy powers, like out of a need to kind of be continue to be involved in this world despite its dangers. So yeah, I'll talk more on it whenever we get to those chapters, but I certainly don't feel like the loss of those powers and their regaining especially is particularly poor writing from Kubo. I think it fits within the world that he's created, but ultimately with this idea of like a fragile sort of power, it's something that we explore also with a couple of other characters. Like Hitsugaya's got the whole pedal thing, which then gets revealed to kind of not be so much of a fragility, but perhaps a maturation of his power. And that it's a weakness that it has to sort of power up. And it's interesting that is mirrored then by Ikaku, who has this like kind of like meter that it has to build up, but then also using his power, which is very destructive. It's very brittle as well. Um, and we get that also with Renji, where he's kind of wearing away at his Bankai. You really get the sense that like there's a perhaps a hesitancy to use Bankai because it is a very powerful technique, but also a very fragile one. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting sort of thing to think about. If there's something larger kind of happening there, there's some sort of maybe trade off for not just using Bankai all the time. That the Bankai gives you that power at some sort of cost or some kind of increased risk. Um, and yeah, I think that's something that Kubo kind of is interested in and explores in a couple different ways. But for the casual reader, maybe doesn't make those links between all the times that it's being explored, that the use of power is being explored in those ways, and the fragility of power is really kind of being brought to the forefront. And so it can feel like whenever these moments kind of go overboard and a character loses their powers, that, like somebody would be like, oh, well, why isn't that permanent? It's like, well, there's narrative reasons that make it pretty clear, and that have always sort of made it clear. But yeah, I don't know. Like you could speak towards like, oh well, it doesn't have like a sense of finality to it, but like, I don't know, man. Komamura is still a fucking dog as far as I understand. So get out of here with that. Anyway, uh, yeah, yeah. This idea of like 7 days, 7 nights, reach the peak of your power. Um, that certainly feels like it kind of like reflects a little bit of the. I wish it was like 9 days and nights, perhaps, but it's a week. The idea that it's sort of like this idea of your power will come to you over time is something that we see revisited with the Quincy King, right? With the revival of Yu Hapak. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Of course, all the parallels between like the Sonrei glove and then later on with the Volston dig and the Let's Still and all of that. Ooh, excuse me. The last sort of thing that I have to say here is that for the design on this, at least as far as I can tell, like the lines that are branching certainly remind me of the way that Bleach is visualized in the manga, right? Of these like sort of branching lines of reishi. And so I feel like that's supposed to be what that's sort of calling towards, this idea of like reishi being put into these very specific sort of circuits and being mastered, right? because it's essentially just a mastery of an energy, right? But yeah, that's it. That's all I got for this one. Thank you so much for watching the video. Thanks for following along. This has been Karker Gold with Bleach Revisited. As always, thanks for watching this one. Give the video a like for getting to the end of it. It's been a hell of a week, and it's going to be an even crazier month. So, hopefully we can stay on top of these. But I don't want to have to take another break after the last one that I had to do. But I might end up needing to. We'll see. Nevertheless, thank you so much for your support. And if you'd like to take that support further, as always, you can do so on the Patreon. I really do appreciate it. The people that support me are on the screen right now, and I want to say thank you to those of you that do support. It does mean quite a lot to me. So, without further ado, that's the end of this one from me to you. Anyway, I've been Karker Gold, and I'm reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.